Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. The National Tri-Lingual Sexual Harassment in the Workplace Helpline has been launched. Chief Labor Relations Officer at the Conciliation, Advisory and Advocacy Division, Ministry of Labor, Sabina Gomez. She joins us to discuss the languages, accessibility, and more. Welcome, Ms. Gomez. Thank you so much for making the time. Now, we've seen the launch, but what does this helpline help to address?
Well, we have a national workplace policy on sexual harassment in Trinidad and Tobago, which has been there since 2019. And part of the implementation process is to public awareness and also accessibility. Making a service accessible to the working population of Trinidad and Tobago, be they nationals or non-nationals in Trinidad and Tobago. And we know we have a lot of migrant community who work, and they ought to be offered the same form of protection as nationals of Trinidad and Tobago. So the whole idea behind the Tri-Lingual Helpline, or the Tri-Lingual Helpline, is open to employers, workers, nationals of Trinidad and Tobago, and then we have a large population of Spanish-speaking migrants. And I know we have in our midst, we have Haitians and we have other persons who their native tongue would be French. So we try to cater to everyone, in Trinidad and Tobago who would enter the workspace so that they too will feel protected.
I'm grateful for that, because I wanted to ask what are the three languages, because I've seen some of the flyers and I've seen in English, I've seen in Spanish, so I was wondering whether or not it's Creole, Patois. Talk to me about the third one.
French. So we have persons within our division who are very proficient in these languages, and we thought that we would offer it up because, we have to be prepared. We don't want to wait until something happens and then, or if somebody call and we don't have the capability to assist them. So we want to offer it as wide as possible to everyone, because we know sometimes working among us, we have people who are silent. They may be afraid to come forward because that fear factor is a real factor, even for nationals of Trinidad and Tobago. They in workspaces and they're afraid to speak out if something happens to them on the workplace. And, sexual harassment is real. And also sexual exploitation, it is real. So, we have acknowledged that, and based on the feedback we have gotten, based on when we go out to do outreach, and we don't only do outreach in our community. I mean, for our locals, we do it for employers. They would call us in to do outreach because that's our mandate to bring awareness to the employers as well as the workers in Trinidad and Tobago. And also we do it in the migrant community. So we work with NGOs such as the Living Water community. We work with IOM, and they have been assisting us, the International Organization for Migration, Ms. Joelle Ali and her team. And we work closely with the Living Water, that is with Mr. Ganesh Rampasad, one of the senior legal officers with the Living Water community. So we collaborate a great deal in terms of rendering assistance, in terms of we do joint outreach sessions, and we really work together because it's something that the government cannot tackle on its own. And so, it's a societal issue. So therefore, the whole of the society ought to come together if we have an issue and try to, render solutions to this issue.
And I appreciate the fact that you talk about, yes, a societal issue, but you also are inclusive in the sense that you're saying a working population versus residents of Trinidad and Tobago. And getting those sorts of definitions, I think there's harassment versus exploitation. I'll ask you to get into that in just a bit, but I want you to define workplace, please. Is it a specific geographic location? Because there are some people that I wouldn't interact with if not for work, even though it may be off the work compound. So set those parameters for me, thanks.
All right. Well, sometimes, people in a working environment and they feel that, okay, when I step out my workplace, I come out my office, I come out my cubicle, I could, and I reach in the car park, I could, interact with you in a way that would be considered inappropriate. Some people feel if we go on a work retreat or if we go on a lime with your colleagues, that I can do something that would be considered inappropriate in the workplace. And we're talking when we say sexual harassment, which varies some harassment. You have harassment and bullying and harassment, and we do acknowledge that that takes place in the workplace as well. But when you come to sexual harassment, that's something of a sexual nature. So, it could be a workplace line, it could be after hours, you're sending WhatsApp messages, if that is your official mode of communication with each other in the workspace. And different forms of communication. It could be, you're working remotely, you're working from home, somebody come at home to drop a package or to pick up work, and something, a transaction happen that may, you know, of a sexual nature, that you may want to say sexual harassment. The person is saying, but I'm not at work, but it is work related. You may go away on a trip with somebody, and on that trip, on some sort of training program or something overseas, and on that trip something happened. And the person say, well, we're not at work, I could do, I could do, I take this opportunity to do something because I'm not at work. So all of that will be considered your workspace, right? So the way how, and there is a draft bill, and we are hoping that soon it will come to fruition, so that persons in Trinidad and Tobago could get relief. Because things are happening in the workplace, and some employers, they don't know what to do. They're not equipped to handle situations when they occur in the workplace, and sometimes they just let it go. They just let it slide. I don't want to take that. I don't want to make a decision. I don't want to do, let me pass the buck on to somebody, because a lot of employers, they're not equipped to handle it when it happens in their workplace.
And how much of that lack of capacity to deal in the workplace, how much how much stems from oversight? And I ask that because there's some things that have been normalized, I guess, for want of a better word, is part of the, people say, but that's part of the culture. So somebody telling somebody, this is, you have a big belly, they say, no, it's not a big belly, it's a tool shed. And these sorts of conversations that may find themselves, one person or one group, and it may be different sexes having a conversation, may find nothing wrong with it, but someone else may say, well, no, this is not something that I am willing to be a part of. So how do you start to filter and say, okay, well, this can fly and this cannot?
Well, before the employer reaches that stage, the employer must have a policy. And coming out of the national policy, all employers in Trinidad and Tobago ought to sit with their workers, and coming out of the national policy, develop their own policy. And then, call us in to do a sensitization session with you, so you will be aware of what is in the national policy. So if you want to start doing, implementing, or you have to say, because they say, okay, where's your policy? What policy did you use to guide your action? Was the worker aware? Because some people may not be aware of what is deemed to be sexual harassment, because it has become so normalized. And then if one person stand up and say, well, I am feeling very uncomfortable with this, I don't like it, and that person goes to make a report, and there's no policy, they have not been sensitized as to what is in the national workplace policy, they haven't been sensitized, so they are unaware. So I think the onus is on all employers in Trinidad and Tobago to bring to the attention of their workers that there is a national policy, and have sensitization sessions, have discussions with your workers. During orientation, when a new worker coming into your workspace, you have to orient them as to how you want to shape the culture, knowing that there is a pending legislation to come. You don't want to be caught off guard when this legislation comes into place, right? So if they do the preparation, like all about now, and get their workplace policy, orient their workers as to what it is, and that is how you change behavior. Because I always make this analogy, before seatbelts came in, before we start wearing seatbelts, there was a buckle up campaign, because it was now a culture to wear seatbelts, right? But with the buckle up campaign came and then the law came and now everybody's wearing seatbelt. So sometimes, people may say, well, it's our culture, if I feel to touch somebody, I could touch them or, I could run and hug them up over here, huggy kissy society. But if somebody come and they don't like it, they feel uncomfortable with it, right? And they choose to lodge a complaint, you have to take it into consideration. You have to investigate it. And that is what a lot of employers sometimes they're afraid to do that. They may have developed relationships over the period of time with these very same worker who may be the perpetrator, and they don't want to take that action because of friendships and all of these things that develop, because it is in the workplace in Trinidad and Tobago, I mean, sometimes you're very good friends with your supervisor and somebody come and make an allegation against the individual, supervisor not going to take you on. So, I mean, all these things are realities. And sometimes you may end up being the villain on the job because everybody will turn on you for coming forward and making the report.
But don't call me
So,
a
I mean,
villain now because I want us to take a short break, because right now it feels as though this is the big half of the conversation. But we take a short break. We are speaking with the Chief Labor Relations Officer, the Conciliation Advisory and Advocacy Division, Ministry of Labor, Sabina Gomez. Stay with us. We'll return with more. Welcome back. We are discussing the National Tri-Lingual Sexual Harassment in the Workplace Helpline. We're doing so with Sabina Gomez. And we haven't necessarily spoken about the logistics of it. So if a person feels aggrieved, Ms. Gomez, and they decide to call the helpline, and I already think that is one thing that is maybe a positive, because I've had the experience where there may be someone who wants help in one form or another, and so like even to contact the employee assistance program, but they would have had to do so through HR, which I can imagine there's a possibility for some sort of stigma already. So the fact that you're able to reach out directly to this helpline, I think, is a positive. But you feel aggrieved, reaching out to the helpline, what is the process going through?
all right. So when you call, you will get a prompt if you're an employer calling seeking advice as to what to do, because sometimes employers really don't have the capacity, they don't know what to do, they want to be able to do the right thing. So there's a prompt for the employer. If you're an employee and you have a situation, you call us, then we would ask you, if you wish to choose to give us your name, that if you don't wish to give us your name, that is it. So we'll take the information from you, we'll probe, and then we'll ask you, have you written to your employer? Have you documented it? Because if it's not written, it never happens. So the first stage, you have to write your employer and let your employer know this happened. Do you have details as to when it happened, what time it happened? Were there any witnesses around? Right? So you have to write it exactly what was, whether it was said, whether it was touching, whether what it was. You have to document it exactly as it happened. And then you give it to your supervisor. So sometimes things like that, they may not have told anybody. It may have happened to them and they kept it for a while before somebody probably prompted them to call, or they may have seen and it's a toll-free number, they may have seen the number somewhere and then they decide to call. So this is what we do. So we set them up in terms of giving them advice, what to do, who to go to, ask them, do you have a workplace policy? Who do you go to? So just the basic information we get from them. And the first stage is it must be documented. If it's not written, it never happened. And some people will go and they will do word of mouth and there's nothing documented. So that is one of the first things we advise them to do. Go to your supervisor, or if the perpetrator is your supervisor, then you go to your manager. So we ask them like, okay, what type of organization is it? Is it a small business? Is it a family-owned business? Is it, a large organization where there's structure? Right? And then we ask if it's something really grievous, then we may need for them to come in, just to get more details. Whether they want us to make an intervention, they will have to approve that, because we have to be mindful when persons come to us, the type of situation that they're in, right? Because that is why we are not mindful to rush and call an employer, because we have to first get the permission from the worker, find out whether or not they have any policy in place, what is it in place, what's the structure like. So we get details from them and we try to assist them, empower them first to go back, write exactly what happened, lodge the complaint firstly. Maybe we can make an interaction in terms of coming into the workplace and doing the sensitization with their workers. But the employer is mandated to investigate all reports of sexual harassment. That is the mandate of the employer. The employer must have a process and a procedure in place because it's a grievance that happened to the worker. And in the workplace policy, we have outlined what is the if you do not have a grievance procedure, we outline what is the grievance procedure for you. And if it's the owner of the business, well, then the worker has to take that outside, because no way they're going to get redress if it's the owner of the business who is the perpetrator. Right? So
And
we would guide them in terms of they have access to a trade union of their choice who can accept the dispute, if they write the employer. But even if it's the owner, you have to write that owner of the business and tell him on such and such a day you did such and such a thing, and I feel unsafe, and you must write the employer and lodge your grievance, whether he's the perpetrator or not. He is the owner. You must bring it to his attention that this is what happened to me and I no longer feel safe on the workplace. And you could then tender your resignation, because what he has in fact done, he has frustrated your contract of employment, because there's no turning back from that. You feel unsafe in the workplace. You no longer feel to come back to work, because this has happened in the workplace and he is the employer. So where do you go from there?
but
So I mean,
but in terms of where do we go from there, we have about 2 minutes, Ms. Gomez. But you just raised a question in my mind. So you speak about the owner and you give the pronoun he. So it makes me wonder whether or not. So is it that is geared towards having women get redress, or what is that
well,
situation like? And I also want to ask for someone who's part of the workplace but maybe a migrant. I think there is some understanding that has been hammered out
yeah.
with Living Waters.
Let me
So
yes.
it's
Let me
almost
get
like
to
30
that.
seconds
Now,
each, thanks.
all right. Now, here what sexual harassment is not only a male perpetrator, you have female perpetrators, right? And we have had experience, we have had trade disputes going to the industrial court with female perpetrators. We have male on male sexual harassment, we have female on female sexual harassment, we have female on male. So it's not only that men are the perpetrators. So we need to get that clear, Trinidad and Tobago. Not only men are perpetrators in the workplace. And I think, more men, I mean, we have had a few men coming forward, but when I go to do outreach, I hear stories about, women on the workplace and how they sexually harass men, but the men don't like it, but they don't say anything. Now, in terms of the MOU that was signed recently, now we have a large migrant population and we do get reports. They come into us. Sometimes they are referred to us from the Living Water community or IOM, about non-payment of wages. Sometimes they work under heinous conditions, and they come into us, seeking redress. So what we try to do in that, we call them walk-in clients. We try to address their issues as much as possible and try to resolve it with the employer. But sometimes they come in, they don't know the name of the employer, they may only have one name. So we have issues around that area. But when they do come in and we do interact with the employer, we try to resolve the issue. And if the issue is not resolved, well, then that is where the MOU comes in. Because most of the time it's non-payment, so they have no money to really join a union to seek redress. So what that MOU does for the migrant community is that if they don't have the funds to do it, we would refer the persons to the Living Water community. They would have a memorandum of understanding with a trade union, and that trade union will then, they will pay the trade union the dues so that the migrant worker will be able to take their matter forward. Because, you know, a lot of employers feel if I hire a migrant, I could pay him below minimum wage. I can, him or her, because you have women who work equally as hard. Even in the construction field, you have both men and women working, and sometimes
And
they don't get
definitely some
paid
people
after.
feel that they could do what they want. But one thing we can't do right
Exactly.
now is go continue the conversation because we're over time. Sorry I asked it so late, but thank you so much, Chief Labor Relations Officer at the
You're
Conciliation Advisory and
welcome.
Advocacy Division, Ministry of Labor, Sabina Gomez. And on behalf of the entire TGT News team, this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. Thank you so much for joining us.